welcome to the next installment of the Train Picker. In Switzerland there are quite a few trains that have a carriage or two with cartoon figures on the outside. So in this video I want to discuss what this is all about and generally talk about the experience of parents and children on trains. In Switzerland there are not only trains on playgrounds, but also playgrounds on trains. Well, and these cartoon characters on the outside of train carriages, they mean that this carriage has a space for families with children. The most common of these carriages are the driving trailers of the Intercity 2000 double-deck carriage sets. In between the many suburban trains around Bern, one of the Intercity 2000 long-distance trains is leaving Bern for Basel. The playground inside these Intercity 2000 trains has a space to crawl along, a slide, a wee cave, and a boat. This play equipment is quite rugged, and from my experience, it can be used by children from about 9 months old to around 12 years old, so it's a really good design. And nearby are seats in a variety of configurations where families can sit together. You can also find cartoon characters on one of the end carriages of many of the twin-deck Swiss Express multiple units, at least in the full-length Intercity version. These multiple units entered regular service from about 2018 onwards. They also have a playground on the upper deck of these specially marked carriages. Well, I don't think that the twin-deck Swiss Express playgrounds are quite as nice as the older ones, but the children still quite like them. But not only trains from Swiss Federal Railways SBB have playgrounds on board. The Rätische Bahn in the canton of Grisons also has playgrounds on their Albra trains, which go across the famous Albula line. These Albra trains are fixed concerts pushed or pulled by locomotive, sometimes with a few additional carriages between the locomotive and the Albra train. On the outside, the family carriage is not marked by a bright cartoon figure, but by this white outline of a conductor, and it's also not the end carriage, but one in the middle of the consist. Inside are games on the tables that can be played without additional equipment. And then there are the rungs leading up to a slide, and underneath there's a cave with sturdy earphones telling stories in Swiss German. This play equipment is in the form of the famous narrow-gauge crocodile locomotive. Well, at least my children also used this play equipment to play being a loco driver. They told me that they liked this playground best of all on-board train playgrounds. So full marks to the Rätische Bahn. In addition to these carriages with the playgrounds, there are some more low-key spaces for families with children on trains. For example, some of the driving trailers of the standard carriage series 4 also sport some cartoon characters on the outside. And inside, the ceiling and walls in part of the carriage are decorated with more of these cartoon characters. The tables then also feature playing boards for some simple games, but these actually require dice and some equipment, so they're not that convenient. Some of the Südostbahn Traverso multiple units also have a space for families, but we haven't gone in those yet, at least not in the family space. And the intercity trains by Deutsche Bahn, that's the German railways, that currently connect Stuttgart and Zurich, also have a space for families with children. Well, that space is not marked on the outside of the trains, but quite clearly inside. The main entertainment here are games that are marked on the tables that can be played without much additional equipment, for example, finger twister. Our children quite like these playgrounds on trains that enter the family spaces. For parents, it means that we don't feel the need to keep our children so quiet when things are getting a bit boisterous. After all, here are spaces where you can expect loud children. On the timetables and information boards, these carriages are marked with a teddy symbol, and our children are really experienced by now in spotting them. There are other ways in which families and children are made to feel welcome on trains. Most toilets, for example, have baby changing facilities. Trains, buses, trams, and ships are normally have plenty of space for prams, and it's normally quite easy to get them on. But even more important is the pricing. So for just 30 francs per child, the parents can take along their children under 16 for free for an entire year. And children under 6 years old are free anyway. For families, that certainly can make traveling by public transport competitive with a car. It also teaches children early that going by train is quite normal. So this is the standard in Switzerland, even for other places. So even when we went on heritage trains, children traveling with their parents went for free. The availability of public transport and trains for children is also reinforced by the fact that many children go by train quite regularly for school trips and on their own. For example, here in Switzerland, I have sent some of my children out on their own to get around on public transport. That's quite normal. In New Zealand, children under 14 years old can't be left alone except on the way to and from school. That's maybe the school exemption is a hangover from the old days. When we told some Swiss people that children under 14 years shouldn't be left alone in New Zealand, they laughed and wondered why people in New Zealand were so paranoid. Well, here children as young as 6 regularly use public transport on their own. So even when I lived in Germany, I went for long distance train trips alone from the age of 10. And from the age of 12, I regularly went to Switzerland alone, where I not only had to change trains, but from train to ferry and then from ferry back to train. I never had any problems. By giving children some responsibility and having confidence in them, they can learn. I still remember a student in America being asked what the hardest thing was for her moving from South Korea to the USA. She had lived in South Korea until she was about 13 years old or so, and then moved to the USA. She said the most difficult thing for her was the lack of public transport options in the USA and how her world was suddenly so limited. In South Korea, she had visited friends alone by public transport from when she was 8 years old, and that quite regularly. And suddenly in the USA, she had to be driven everywhere, and her movements, even as a university student later on, were quite restricted. The way children and families are welcome on trains tells us a lot about how society as a whole treats children. As the train vicar, I often relate my railway experiences to the church. Of course, in contrast to some other societies, Judaism and Christianity for a long time were generally welcoming to children, not so much only as heirs, but as valued members of the people of God. Now, how do we reflect the welcome of children and families in our churches? Do we give them spaces that show that they are welcome, spaces where they even can be loud? Do we give them the safety and the confidence to come to church? Do we expect also that they can handle church and faith? And do we give them responsibility so that they can learn? I think that church and society are enriched by having children among them.